Welcome to the AgeWell Podcast, brought to you by the UCD Ageing Network. Hosted by Olayinka Aremu, this podcast brings you fresh, inclusive conversations on aging, health, and community. We're so glad you're here. Happy listening and stay tuned.
Hello and welcome to the AgeWell Podcast, where we explore ideas, research, and innovations shaping aging, generally in Ireland and across the globe. Again, my name is Olayinka Aremu. I'm an assistant professor here in the UCD, and I'm your host today. I'm delighted that you're joining us today, and most importantly, we are joined by a very special guest, Professor Helen Roche. I hope I got that right.
That's good.
She's a leading figure in the field of nutrition and aging at University College Dublin. Helen has dedicated decades of research to understanding how nutritional strategies can help us age well, prevent decline, and improve well-being in later life. Today, we'll be talking about everything protein, sarcopenia, plants versus animal-based diets, and the powerful, sometimes complicated combination of nutrition and physical activity. I believe that this is going to be a very fascinating conversation, and I'm so glad that you're here to share it with us.
Thanks, Ola. Lovely to meet you too.
Thank you so much. So permit me to call you Prof. Prof, welcome again to this podcast. Again, like I said, we are honored to have you with us. So as a matter of just introduction, let's begin this way. Could you share a little about your journey into nutrition research and what first drew you to focus on aging?
Okay, so initially I trained as a dietitian, and after I completed my internship in that in St. Vincent's Hospital in Dublin, I really felt a little bit frustrated by clinical dietetics, and I wanted to understand the hows and the whys, different elements of nutrition affected health. So that was the reason why I went into research. And in terms of the whole area of aging and healthy aging, the reasons for getting involved in that are sort of obvious, because that represents a huge and very important proportion of our population. So half of my research group would focus on aging per se, but it's more healthy aging. And then the other half looks at innate immune function in terms of preventing infection. Just everything really is focused on strategies to promote health.
Absolutely. I think that's fantastic. That's such an insightful journey. And it's really clear that your work has been driven by a real passion for improving lives. So let's dig into some of what you've discovered over the years. I'm going to start first with nutrition and aging. So from your experience, what have we learned about how nutrition can promote healthy aging? Like, what does the evidence really tell us now?
Yeah, I guess over the last number of years, we've been doing a lot of work in, say, the area of sarcopenia. And sarcopenia is the loss of muscle mass and strength with time according to age. It's a natural process. Now, a lot of researchers work in this space, but what has been demonstrated is that if you compare people who have a high habitual protein intake and low, those who tend to have a high habitual protein intake tend to maintain their skeletal muscle mass for a longer time. So everything about nutrition is trying to create a good baseline, because like aging is a natural process. So if you've got a higher threshold at the start, then there's less of a chance that, the natural sort of loss of muscle mass will have less of an impact. And it's just important just to stay strong as you get older, because if you lose that strength, then there's a greater chance of somebody falling. And then when you've got a fall, it can just lead to a snowball of different effects. So just very much, it's a positive perspective. It's just trying to keep your strength, keep that health for as long as possible, really.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And it really shows our everyday dietary choices can make a long-term difference Like one nutrient that always get attention in this conversation is protein, right?
Yes.
So speaking about protein needs and sarcopenia, like you mentioned, that's the age-related loss of muscle.
Yeah.
What do we now understand about their relationship, and why is this so critical, for the older people?
Yeah. Okay. So your protein requirements go up with age because with age, your appetite is reduced and your requirement for energy is reduced. So you actually have to pack in more nutrients per calorie. So that means you have to think a little bit more about what you would consume. And in order to keep muscle mass strong, you have to continually sort of kick the body into action to synthesize or make more muscle proteins. And you do that if you reach a peak and a peak of amino acid. Amino acids are the building blocks
Yeah.
of proteins. So you need to hit a peak, and you will only hit that peak, which will then induce synthesis and creation of more new protein in your muscle, if you consume about 30 grams. So 30 grams is about 3 ounces. And 3 ounces of protein wouldn't typically be consumed in a breakfast if you don't have eggs or dairy, say milk or yogurts. So you have to think about your food choices quite carefully. And that's one of the reasons why there has been so much focus on protein.
I see the food choices, and I think that's very challenging sometimes. But of course, not everyone reacts to interventions in the same way, I suppose, which brings us to another interesting angle, in your research. Speaking about what policymakers, about policies and practices, so to say, what can policymakers, healthcare professionals, or
Yeah.
community organizations do to better help older adults adopt these nutrition and activity strategies in their daily life?
Yeah. And that's really important. And I'd nearly like to take one step back from that because you see, when you've got a poor appetite because you don't feel well, you might have flu or there might be something else going on, your appetite is automatically reduced. And if you're in a clinical situation, you will be given what's called oral nutrition supplements, which are like sippy drinks, which are high in protein. Those sippy drinks are provided through the healthcare system, but they're atrocious because they taste dreadful. And so we've been trying to look at different ways of incorporating supplemental proteins within people's habitual diet, as in what they like. So we do these studies where we've sort of powder forms of supplements, which are then incorporated into different foods that people like. And, you have to acknowledge people's choices, people's preferences, because food's a really important part of somebody's day. And it should be something that should be enjoyed. So we've been focusing on building the evidence base in relation to trying to understand which are the best proteins to prevent sarcopenia and also loss of appetite before we get to the policy stage. So we're in that zone at the moment, because then you can advise the Department of Health or Age Action or all of those agencies to go, in this scenario, this is the way you might tackle it, because it's quite complex. Currently we do interventions, but the interventions are disgusting. Have you ever tried one of those supplements?
Well, when I was working in nursing home, I did try,
and they are
and
absolutely disgusting.
exactly, and actually, like you said, just to take a step back from that policy, this debate about plant-based protein, animal-based protein. What's your take? Like, do you think plant-based protein supplementation are as effective as the animal-based protein for aging adults?
Yeah. Okay, well, that question is quite complex. So we definitely need to move towards more plant-based diets. However, in terms of sustainability. However, the amino acid profile, again, those amino acids are the building blocks of proteins. The amino acid profile of plant-based proteins are not necessarily as optimal. for an older person, as in they don't contain the same level of key amino acids, essential amino acids. So they're at a lower concentration. So currently we have a study that is ongoing, which is trying to compare and contrast the pros and the cons of the plant-based and the animal-based. For the moment, say in my dietary choices, I would still be using combinations. I would not be changing from one to the other completely, because there are benefits of both. And essentially, some of the animal-based proteins really are very important. And they're important because they provide those essential amino acids, and they always will.
Yeah.
But what we can do from a sustainable dietary perspective is then supplement with both plant-based amino acids or animal-based. But I wouldn't be advocating a complete switch, particularly in people who are older.
I see. I think that's very interesting that, even thinking about nutrition not existing as a vacuum, so it still needs to be adaptable to the need of the person. And speaking about that, nutrition, they say it's closely associated as well with physical activity, right? So you emphasize the importance and also the challenges. So if you could just explain a little bit why this combination is powerful, and what can be the differences, or why is it both powerful and complicated in the same vein? Yeah.
That is a really important question, and something that is very important for your audience to appreciate. So I'm a nutritionist, so I'm going to be biased, thinking that dietary interventions are the best. And I did carry that bias for a while. We have done studies looking at protein interventions on sarcopenia. It was led by Keelan Murphy, who was a very, very dedicated research dietitian. But in those contexts, increasing protein intake is sometimes not enough. And we've done studies where we give the supplements and including those drinks, and it doesn't cause a significant improvement in skeletal muscle mass and strength to prevent sarcopenia. But what other investigators have done, particularly in the Netherlands, they have demonstrated that the combination of protein intake plus resistance exercise, that really is the key. And the difference between what I mean by resistance exercise is like weight bearing exercise. So it's not swimming, which is non-weight bearing, and doing that in combination with higher protein intakes. And the rationale is that your muscles actually need to be stressed a little bit in order to begin this recovery or renewal process. And then you supply your diet with the amino acids or the protein. So you're providing your body with the building blocks. But you really do need that resistance exercise. And again, public health advice very much focuses on exercise from a cardiac perspective, which is aerobic exercise, which again is walking, maybe golfing, gardening, any sort of activity. But we really have to shift that a little bit in terms of resistant exercise. Now, you don't have to go to a gym. You can weight lift, say, a liter bottle of milk, or, a bag of sugar is a kilo. So it's trying to figure out ways in which one could incorporate resistance exercise within activities of daily living. But you really do the body needs that kick. The kick from the exercise. And, with 2020 hindsight, really, it's probably that exercise is more important and nutrition is secondary important.
Yeah. I see that. And, talking about interventions, I know older people respond in different ways to all this nutritional intervention, right? Why, so what factors would you think explain these differences in their response?
Yeah. So typically in human dietary intervention studies, approximately 40% of people will respond to an intervention. And we are trying to figure out what are the characteristics of those people who respond really well and those who don't. And I'm sorry, but I don't have the answer because we're trying to figure that out at the moment. But essentially, there are key characteristics. So an individual who is generalized healthy, they've got more social contact, they're more physically active. Individuals like that tend to respond better. It's just once you go beyond a certain threshold, and it's not as if it's a one-way pathway, but it's more, this is why I'm sort of focusing on prevention, really, and, being proactive in terms of maintaining skeletal muscle mass, bone density, because once you get past a certain threshold, it's actually very hard to build it back up again.
Yeah.
And an example would be in terms of physical fitness, because if you're, say, sick for 2 weeks or you're immobile for 2 weeks, if you go for a walk, you'll feel that your muscles are sore. You have to get back up to that previous level. And just with age, getting back up to that previous level, it just takes more time and it takes more effort. So the prevention part is just so much better if it's possible. But sometimes it's just not possible. You break a leg, you break a hip, things
Life
are
happens.
reversible.
Yeah.
It just happens.
And that's true. Life happens. You just need to. And that's why I think research is actually very important to help us know what next, what is out there. So in terms of research, and probably maybe before I go to that, to come back to the policy and practice, probably from your own experience and maybe from research, do you want to share few things that you think from policy point of view we can be doing now to help older people adopt the nutrition, healthy nutrition or even preventative strategies about that?
Yeah, I mean, certainly, you see, I'm not an expert in the development of policy, and I guess I have to be very conscious of what I'm good at and what I'm not good at. So I'm good at understanding the effects of different interventions. And then the ideal scenario would be that I would work with other colleagues who are, have knowledge and insight in relation to the whole policy, firstly development, and then rollout element. So that's why interdisciplinary research is so important. And I guess I'm only learning that whole process of policy development. But also, like, Ireland is changing hugely. The group of older people is expanding, and we now have a far more diverse community of older people. So we have to change our recommendations to suit that, and also to take account of, say, the sustainability agenda. Because on one hand, we're saying to eat more, but then you have to produce more. But then we have to make sure that that is also compatible with other public health agendas or, sustainability agendas, for example. So I'm very sorry, but I'm not an expert in policy, but I'm an expert in dietary interventions, as it were. But that's why, we should work in programs that are very multidisciplinary.
Thank you so much. I like the fact that you mentioned that diverse community of the older people and how probably in terms of nutrition and the kind of food choices available in Ireland is not really suiting, to the need. Even if we look at nursing home, what kind of food choices do we have? If we have somebody from Asia, from Africa, as an older person, do we have those food choices? I think those are conversations we need to start having. And like you said, interdisciplinary research, which is very important. And I think that's a great one. In terms of future direction, like where do we go? I think we've mentioned some of that anyway. But what do you see as the most promising areas of nutrition and aging research, probably for the next decade?
Okay, for the next decade, I sort of see two potential areas. It is defining that balance between animal-based and plant-based. As I mentioned at the outset, another part of our work looks at innate immune function in older people. And it is proposed by a lot of scientists that there's a thing called immune senescence, as in your immune system gets old. New findings that we've generated contradicts that, and it demonstrates that 47% of older people who are, say, over the age of, I think the mean age or the average age was 69 or 70 years of age, 47% of those people had a robust immune response. And for me, that's really positive, because that means that they're able to fight infections. They're able to, you know, keep their body well. And also that means that with that knowledge, we can also focus on the other 53% and try to look at proactive and prophylactic nutritional interventions to prevent that deterioration. Again, it's all about trying to keep prevention. It's keeping that nutritional status up for as long as we can. And as I say, it's all about quality of life.
Yeah.
You know, rather than necessarily quantity, it's quality.
Exactly. Thank you so much, Professor Roche. We're rounding up, but I'm just wondering, do you have any folklore relating to nutrition you want to share?
Okay. Yeah, any folklore. I was a little bit challenged on this, but what I thought of was there is a lovely Irish saying, and I'm not going to say it in Irish because I'm afraid my Irish is not that good, but the essential meaning of it is, if you're not strong, you have to be clever. And I think that is a saying that is very relevant as we all get a little bit older, because when you get a little bit older, you're not necessarily weaker or whatever, but you have to be clever in terms of what you do. And you have to be clever in terms of your food choices, that you make sure there's plenty of protein, that you make sure that there's plenty of vitamins, and that you think about it. And rather than sort of going, oh, well, I don't feel that great today, so I'll just have tea and toast. Because tea and toast is not. It is probably the most common Irish snack or sometimes meal, but that's not necessarily going to help you. Whereas you might sort of go, okay, I might have an omelette, or I might have a cheese sandwich, or, you know, so yeah, just we have to be a little bit more clever.
If you want to be strong, be clever, right? Okay.
Clever.
Yeah, that's
just
it.
think about it
I
little
like
bit
that.
more.
I like that.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I think it really has a human touch, like what we're very relatable. To close, like you, maybe on a final note, if you have a closing message, maybe something you want to share to leave our audience with.
I guess, you know, you have to think about nutrition and food and the social aspects. Food's very important. You should enjoy it. And, you know, the more you can enjoy a meal with other people, the better. And yeah, like nutrition should be a very positive experience.
Absolutely. That's beautifully said, Professor. Thank you so much for such a rich and inspiring conversation. Sorry, we have to, draw the curtain here. You've really helped us to see not just the science, but the practical pathways for aging well through nutrition and physical activity. And to our listeners,
super.
Yeah, thank you for joining us on the AgeWell Podcast, produced by the UCD Ageing Network. If you have enjoyed today's episode, please share it with your colleagues, network, and loved ones. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Until next time, I'm Olayinka Aremu. Let's keep working together to create a future where aging is not just about adding years to life, but life to years. Goodbye for now. Thank you.